Okay, so it looks like it's 8:01. Why don't we get started? I'm Dr. Arlen Myers. I'm the president and CEO of the Society of Physician Entrepreneurs. And this is a joint presentation that we have every month with the American Board of Artificial Intelligence in Medicine and the Society of Physician Entrepreneurs. So my co-host is Anthony Chang. Anthony, welcome. Would you introduce yourself?
Sure. Good morning, everyone. I'm a pediatric cardiologist and a data scientist with a business and global health background.
Great. So welcome, everyone. Our guest today is Tim Cooley. Tim is located in Park City, Utah, and he's the executive director of Park City Angels. So I thought it would be useful to discuss essentially this aspect of raising money, since that's always a topic of interest. So let's start off, Tim. First of all, thanks very much for doing this. And can you tell us a little bit about yourself and sort of how you wound up doing what you're doing?
Yeah, totally. So I have a crazy background. After high school, I joined the Marine Corps. Had no idea what I wanted to do. My mom is a physician. And so I was like, I'm an athlete. My mom's a doctor. Why not combine those worlds? So I ended up in sports medicine. I ended up working at the University of Arizona, ended up doing a stint with the 49ers, and then came up to Utah to get my master's in sports medicine. And so during that time frame, I realized I hated it. Just wasn't the world I wanted to be involved in, and got very much involved in starting my first company, which was a health and wellness company. Ended up turning that into a health and wellness blog, which grew pretty well, and then ultimately exited that company. From there, I went out and did a whole bunch of jobs in marketing and sales and a bunch of stuff. Came back to the business world and got my MBA. And through that, got involved in digital health consulting. Ended up starting my second company, which was a mobile gaming company focused on getting people to walk more. And at the time, not very many people were doing that. Nobody believed in us, and couldn't raise money. And so Pokemon Go came out a couple of years later. You know, that created a whole new industry. And so I loved being part of that. But I was like, man, why can't I raise money? So I got involved in helping others raise money. So I ran a small seed fund at the University of Utah. And then from there, I went into the accelerator and incubation space. And then I was fortunate to become the executive director for Park City Angels. So I've kind of been on both sides of the equation, you know, but started off not in this world at all. So.
Yeah, interesting. It's just out of curiosity, what'd you hate?
I hated the repetition part of it. I really liked, I realized that I was like an operation person. So I like to fix something and then move on. And as we know, in like physical therapy and athletic training, it's like, here's your thing, just follow the piece of paper. And it just wasn't something that I just didn't love it.
Got it.
And you got paid terribly, so.
Yeah, great. Well, why don't we get to the point, then we can sort of do a little bit deeper dive. So what are the biggest mistakes people make when they pitch?
Yeah, so let me show you guys my screen real quick. There's only a couple slides I want to go over. This is a much longer conversation, but
yeah.
So especially in the medical world, I think that most people are researchers first and not entrepreneurs, not CEOs, not salespeople. And so the goal of a pitch, especially in the medical world, is to answer these 4 questions. So does the investor know what I'm talking about? This is literally the most difficult part of any medical presentation, because we start talking about ligase, polymer, B287, whatever that means. And as an investor, I honestly don't even care. But you guys typically are super excited about the thing that you made, and that does mean something to you. The second thing that's very rarely communicated is the market need. So yeah, maybe your technology works, maybe you know, like it can do this thing. We hear like cures cancer all the time, but like, is there a market need for it? And by that, I mean, who's going to buy it? So yeah, who's going to buy this technology? And sometimes we know, and sometimes we don't. And then the last thing, and I got to move this because I can't read it. Yeah, does it work? So typically if you're doing on that benchtop test, right, like it works there, but does it work clinically? Does it move along the path of development? And so does the product work or not? So those are kind of the 4 big questions that need to be answered. The big issue, again, like I talked about, is most people are researchers first. And so they think that this is a pitch deck. Having been in the medical space and presented research, I know both sides of this. And what usually we see happen is people will poach something from some research paper and then throw that into their pitch deck. And they're not the same thing. They're used for completely separate purposes. From a visual point of view, this is what we normally get. You know, most of us in the medical space aren't creative, and we're like, oh, let's splash some color. So we put a black background with some white text or a blue background with some white text. This is actually very difficult to read when someone's presenting. So if you're going to do this and you want to do some colors, just do white background and black text. It works just as good. Don't get creative. It's not necessary. And then to add to this, this is what I tell everybody who's raising capital. Investors, like you, when you walk in, if I'm talking to you, it's because I want to put money into your company, or at least I'm considering it. So you already have a yes. Everything from the time you start talking till we end the conversation changes my opinion about you and the company from an investment point of view. So keep that in mind. I want to put money into your company. That's how I make more money. The second thing is that most investors are smart, especially in the medical space. You know, they know a lot of things, and typically I think we forget that they know stuff because they don't know exactly what I'm doing right now. And so we kind of say, oh, you don't get it. Well, it's your job to make me get it. Like I talked about before, does the investor know what I'm talking about? So if they don't get it, that's on you, not on them. Again, it's not my job to understand. It's your job to educate me. Another thing, what happens is people tend to memorize their pitches. Don't do this. It should just be a conversation. Like I didn't memorize what I'm talking about. It's just a conversation, and you're using your slides to kind of remind you what to talk about. Another thing that happens is people want to glamorize their presentations. And so they add like these animations, which is like where like the word pops up or it flies in from the side, or like maybe the screen will twirl or it'll do something like weird like that. Don't do that. It's more distracting on your part than the investor's part. And I like to tell people, we're not magicians, we're just presenting. So just put all the data, like you guys have read this thing probably 5 times while I'm talking about it, and that's totally okay. Another thing, again, because most people are teachers, especially in the research world, and they put that agenda slide at the beginning, not needed in a pitch. We already know what you're talking about. Like we already know the order, we know the things we're looking for. That is just not needed. It's just a waste of a slide and time, even if it's just seconds. The other thing that you want to do is keep the pitch high levelish, and this is really important on the medical space. Again, like I mentioned about this polymer ligase thing, I don't really need to know the science, especially not the first presentation. If I do know more about your industry, then I'm going to ask a ton of questions, and that's really, really valuable. You know that I know more about it, so therefore you kind of want to get to a meeting with me, right? If I'm asking you about, like, for example, something athletic training related, I probably know something about it, and so I should be a really good contact for you. And then finally, your pitch should flow like a story, and like I have a whole book about this. So those are a couple little tidbits that I think can be helpful.
Excellent. Any more slides? No.
Oh, there's way
Okay.
more slides, but that's good.
No, but
now.
I mean, okay, so let's dive in a little bit deeper. So let's can you explain to people what an angel is, and in fact, I mean, how does that work? Like,
Yep. So typically an angel investor has come from a couple of different routes. One may be a medical professional who has excess capital. They're towards the end of their career typically, and they're very interested in kind of developing the next version of life, right? It's their own money. That's a very typical thing, and it's more of a hobby. So they're investing as a hobby, not as a profession, like not as a venture capital group, family office. Those guys are investing as a life, like that's their job, versus an angel's like, do I like this? Do I not? We'll see what happens. So typically you have professionals, so they might be engineers, doctors, investment bankers, things like that. The second version is an entrepreneur who grew their business and successfully exited, and they're trying to give back to the next group of people. And those are typically or the third version is like these family office people who somebody is investing on behalf of someone else. But typically it's not a full-time job. It's a hobby.
And do you have to have any qualifications to be an angel?
You do. So don't hold me to these numbers, but there's something like this. It's typically something around the lines of 250K of an annual salary if you live by yourself. So if you're single, if family is around 3 to 350. The third criteria is something around $1 million in liquidable assets, not including your home. And then the fourth one in this newer version is somebody who's like in the industry who can make an educated assumption about risk. So somebody who, like in my case, is a deal flow manager who is their job to do this stuff. If they're not fitting those other categories, they can also become an angel.
So in other words, you have to be an accredited investor.
Yeah, you do have to be
as defined by the SEC.
Yeah.
Right. And just coincidentally, the SEC is fooling around with regs that would increase the amount that you have to have net worth to be an accredited investor. They're thinking of raising it. I think it's 2 million. They're thinking of raising it to 10. Do you have thoughts about the wisdom of that?
I think it's not a bad idea. Then what's going to end up happening is Reg C, which is crowdfunding, is going to take over, I think. Or SPV, or special purpose vehicles, will take over in a different way. But what we're seeing right now in angels is the rounds are going way higher. Like 50K used to do a lot for a company. And now you're seeing seed rounds, you know, for, let's say just tech, at 2 to 3 million to start, which is not what they used to be 10 years ago. So I think that they have to change, because 50K doesn't go as far. Even though you can do more with it, it just doesn't go as far.
Right.
And so on the medical side, you know, you guys raise a lot more money. Like you guys raise $20 million in a seed round sometimes. And so that really changes the type of investor.
Okay. Deepak, do you have a question?
Oh, no. I was just following through.
Okay, no, Deepak, you have a question you put up in the chat. Do you want to
Yes.
introduce yourself and ask the question?
Sure. I'm Deepak Sluja. I'm a data scientist and a general practitioner by training. I have a quick question. I have a small company called Clinideep.ai. We're not generating any revenue yet because I just opened it late last year, but we have potential to get some pilots, and we're looking into that. But do angel investors invest in pre-revenue products at all?
I'm going to say sometimes. It really depends on the angel themselves and if your relationship with them is close, they may invest in you pre-revenue. Most angels, again, like I mentioned before, are hobby investors. And so they kind of follow trends. So they follow lean model canvases. And what I'll say is typically they don't if you're not at pre-revenue, but that doesn't mean they don't want to get to know you. And the reason for that is, like, we screen 3 deals or up to 5 deals a month, and you're just competing against other people who are at revenue.
So Tim, I registered my company and myself at angelmd.com.
Oh, nice.
Is that a good start to find these type of angel investors?
No.
Where do you think I should go, or how do you think I should find pre-revenue angel investors?
Right. So yeah, that gets to the question. How do you find I'm sorry to interrupt, but I put a link to the Angel Capital Association, which basically has on its website essentially every angel network in the United States. There's like 300 or 400 or something like that. So how do you find the right angel or angel network specifically for what you do? Because you can't spray and pray. It's very specific.
Yeah, so I do think that a spray and pray works better sometimes, but it's a lot to manage. The best thing to do, honestly, is figure out how to get an intro. So if you know that, I think you're in Utah, aren't you? Are you in Utah?
Deepak, are you in Utah?
No, I'm in Maryland.
Okay, so there's going to be probably a 1 million cups near you. There's going to be some entrepreneurial groups. And then what you should probably do is just ask around. Like all you need to do is get that verbal introduction. When you start going outside of your state, you got to be very much more intentional about finding out what that group. So let's say, for example, you're going to reach out to Startup Health or something like that as an accelerator. Then you want to make sure that you fit their mantra. So for example, let's say you're going to email me. If you do something in digital health and gaming, especially in the medical side or VR, I will read your email and I will take a meeting with you. If I don't know you, I've never met you before, because those are things that I'm just interested in. So you have to find out what the trigger is for that particular group or person. One of the nice things you can do from a finding point of view is find adjacent products. So let's say, for example, let's say I don't know, let's find a company that's selling that's in an adjacent market where, like, if you were to put your two products together, it would be a really good service, right? Like those two combined would make a better product. If you reach out to the company or the groups that funded that other person, that's the easiest way, because it's like, look, you already know the path to sale. You can like bolt on your product to their sales team. And then if you sell the one, you could probably sell the both together. So I think that's a really nice way of, and you can find those people through Crunchbase typically.
Thank you.
Great. Usman, you have a question? You're muted.
Can you hear me now?
Yep.
Okay. So I just finished attending an E&I Summit, which is Entrepreneur and Investors Summit here in Salt Lake City, Utah. I had a great fun and spirited conversation with a bunch of VCs here. And one of them was about the valuation of the company. So how do I, as a digital health founder, value my company before presentation? And how do I do the due diligence on invest on different angel groups that I'm going to, especially in the realm of digital health. I'm not talking about medical devices or biotech or those spheres. So if you can talk to some of those issues, that would be great.
Yeah. And for those that don't know yet, maybe you can define valuation. What does that term mean of a company?
Yeah, so the valuation is the amount of money that you think if you were to sell the company today, that's what it's worth, basically.
All right. It's like, what's the price of your house when you put it on the market?
Yeah, exactly.
And okay.
So when you're valuing the company, okay, so my first answer is don't. Delay the valuation as long as you possibly can. Sometimes that's not a case, but if you have to, there typically is there's value inflection points of a company. So for example, an idea in this day and age is only worth maybe $1 million, right? You can value at $1 million. I wouldn't put a value on just an idea. If you've built the product and it's ready to be sold, or it's really close to being sold, and then I'm talking about SaaS technology or something in that realm, typically the valuation can be anywhere between like 5 and 10 million. If you got some paying customers, things like that. The next valuation ends up being in like the 20 to 50 range. And again, it depends on what you're trying to accomplish. But you typically have about $5 million in sales. So to get to that next valuation, again, I'm talking mostly with SaaS. Medical is a really tough one if you're looking at from a like a therapeutic or like a pharma case, because the company can be sold once the patent is created sometimes. So your valuation can be in the $20 million range and you've never hit market. So I would just say, and Arlen, you probably know this better than I do, but certain product types have different stage valuation just naturally. And those right now, for whatever reason, are kind of climbing. So
yeah. Anthony, you want to comment on AI companies and valuation kind of things?
Well, it's all over the place.
For sure.
And I think whatever Tim was saying in terms of difficulty of having a value on a company is, I think, 5 to 10x more difficult with AI companies, because a lot of times you don't know how your service will generalize in the real world. I think also, just to go back to basics, sometimes in the companies are actually making revenue I guess it's 3 to 15, 20x your annual, excess revenue over expenses. So that's, if people want to know a quick way of evaluating your company, that's one way to do it. But in the AI, it's so unpredictable. And the general gestalt I get, and Arlen, you can tell me if you agree, is that a lot of AI startups are way overvalued when they get the funding. I'm sometimes shocked at what companies are getting funded and when I know people on the inside. So it's a lot of money thrown at AI right now in healthcare.
Yeah. And that brings up a couple questions. So for example, if you're going to sell your house and you want to put a price on it, well, there's a couple things that kind of go into the price, like macroeconomics, like now, like housing's crazy for a bunch of reasons. How nice is the house? What neighborhood is it in? What are the comps? All that stuff. So and on the investment side of a company, it's kind of a black art. So what are the techniques other than discounted cash flow? Because there is no cash flow. How do you, what techniques are used to value a startup or an early seed stage company? And do they make any sense?
I'm going to answer the last question first. The answer is they do not make sense. Sometimes you just pull it out of the hat, and if someone agrees to it, then it's like house prices, right? If someone's going to pay you $1 million for a $200,000 home, you take the money. And so I think in valuations, it's kind of the same thing right now. I mean, we're seeing companies that pre-revenue at like 50 million because they're, blockchain based or something. And you're like, that makes no sense. Like, how am I going to make my money? Like, I got to sell. And keep in mind, one of the things I think people forget in evaluation, if I give you, let's say 500K and the company's valued at 50 million, that means that if they sell at 50 million, I just make my money back, right? Maybe a little bit more than that. So what I'm looking for is a 10x return on that. So you have to sell at 10 times 50 million for me to make my money back, or make that my targeted investment number back. And so when you come in with a ridiculous valuation, you have to prove that you can exit this company at some crazy amount. So I think that that's something that's forgotten a lot. And you're like, I think it's just forgotten. Even a $10 million valuation, it's like, you're gonna have to go raise again. And so we're all gonna get diluted and none of us are gonna make money.
Chris, you have a question?
Yeah, Tim, I think it'd be useful to talk about the number of potential deals that an angel group or a VC group would look at in a year. I mean, the numbers are high, particularly in this environment. Mm-hmm. And then if you could address for the participants, how do you differentiate yourself in that first conversation so you get a second look?
Okay.
Because, particularly for, new types of technologies like AI, where there's not a really good understanding of it, machine learning, AI, et cetera. So I think that'd be good to talk about.
Okay. So the first part of that is make sure you know the triggers. So for example, in Park City Angels, if you say you're a Utah-based company, I will guarantee 100% I will take a meeting. Okay. So secondly to that, like I talked about before, know who I am. So if you hit digital health or something along those lines, I will take a meeting, because one, Utah is what our focus is. It's Utah in the Mountain West. So if you're Mountain West, I might take a meeting with you. Okay. If my calendar isn't booked, then I might take a meeting if it's Mountain West. But if it's digital health, I will, because it's just something that I'm interested in personally. And so again, so you find the person, get to know them a little bit through LinkedIn or whatever. So like Chris, I'm sure like there's something that you really like I don't know what that is. And Arlen, you have experience in the ENT world, you said. So if there's something in that space, the odds are you'll probably take a meeting because it's something you might be interested in. And then what was the second question?
Just the number of deals that they would potentially look at.
Okay.
I'm in the Metro Boston area, and it's frothy there, right? There's all types of groups, and they'll, I come mostly from clean tech, and some of these clean tech angel groups, like Clean Tech Venture Group, they'll look at 200 to 300 deals a year. Yeah.
So we get about 1,000 applications a year. And so, and all of us are part-time. It's just a part-time side hustle for me, honestly. And so you can imagine, like, I'm not looking at all of them. That's way too much time. So from that 1,000, so let's say I get 1,000 every month, or I mean 100 every month, then I only meet with 20 a month. And then from there, we filter those 20 down to 5, and we filter those 5 down to 2.
So you would fund 2 out of, let's say, 100.
We might fund 1 out of the 2.
Yeah, okay.
So I hear you
same here.
saying, yeah, I hear you saying that it's, you know, a lot of this is who you know, and where you live.
Yeah.
But so that raises a couple questions. More and more angel networks are syndicating deals. So for example, Thai syndicates deals, maybe your group syndicates deals with other angel networks outside of Utah. Do you?
Indirectly. So typically we have someone who's part of, like, I'm part of the Western something syndication. It's like Texas and Utah and some stuff. But I also participate, like we have a person who's part of Keiretsu Forum. That's a syndication. You know, yeah.
Okay.
Haven't
So
really
it doesn't
figured out the
necessarily
specifics.
disqualify you if you're not in Utah. I mean, if you're in Colorado or Texas or whatever. I mean, maybe if you're in Boston, it's different. I don't know, but a regional consortium at least gets you within the radius of interest.
Yeah, well, and because we're always looking for good deals. I don't care where they come from. And
Right.
you know, Zoom has made it really
Right.
convenient. So
Okay.
like, and what I'd hope is everybody on this call is like, hey, I saw you on the thing, you know, here's my idea, but like I also met this other person, like, please send us deals. Like those referrals are really valuable.
So the next question is, you mentioned inflection points. So when is the best time to raise money? That one stream of thought is the best time to raise money is at an inflection point or just before an inflection point.
Mm-hmm.
Is, in your opinion, is that true?
Yeah, so best time to raise money is when you don't need it, because then you don't come off as like, my whole world's gonna fall apart if I don't get $50,000. Like that just it doesn't present well. But yeah, so what you should be doing is you should be either right at hitting one. So let's say, for example, the benchtop version just works. And now you're like, look, we just need money to go and do the next study. We've already finished the thing. So like somebody asked before, do people fund ideas? Not typically. But so you want to accomplish something and then raise money on the windfall of that. So I always like to say, like, you never want to invest in a sinking ship. So if someone's like running out of money, not a good time to invest. But if they like accomplish something and their business is going up and to the right, even if they don't have sales, that's really a good time to be like, these guys might be onto something. I don't know.
Yeah. And some people might ask, well, what is an inflection point? How do I get there? I mean, a typical one is monthly recurrent revenue or annual recurrent revenue. That's pretty simple. As you alluded to before, we're making $1 million a year. We're making $5 million a year. That shows some element of traction. I mean, basically you're looking for traction. Like, are you an idea or are you just, you know, two people with a patent on the wall? And so what are some other inflection points? What would be some obvious ones?
Yeah, so product is built, beta customers, even if they're not paying. You know, if we're going on a clinical trial type thing, then it's we've completed our first clinical test, or we've gone in vivo, right? Like, so pig studies, or we're going into people, or whatever the things are. So all the things that you have to do, like for the FDA, are all would consider traction points. You know, like if you got a major grant from the government, like if they're like, dude, we just put $30 million into your thing as a grant, best time to go raise money, because you don't need, because as most people know, that money goes to the study and the development, but you actually need a salesperson or you need a thing, and you only need to raise like 500K. We had a company come through that raised $16 million through non-dilutive funding. Like, the likelihood of getting the other cash you need is pretty high when you can prove that you can raise capital like that.
Right. So you bring up non-dilutive funding. Some folks may not know what, in fact, that term means. Can you define non-dilutive funding and give us some examples of that?
Yeah, so non-dilutive means that it's not an equity stake. So let's say I own 100% of my company, and then Arlen puts in 500K and he owns 50% of my company. So that would be dilutive. So I just diluted myself. And but non-dilutive means I go out and hit up a grant or something, and I get, you know, $200,000 or $500,000, and then I still own all of the company. So every time I do a grant or something like that, it doesn't dilute me or anybody.
And typical examples would be SBIR grants, STTR grants, proof of concept, either local, state, academic, whomever's going to give it to you. I mean, there's actually a pretty long list of places to go to get money that is non-dilutive. And that's what I would suggest when you're starting up. Find that money. You also mentioned that angels don't want to invest in ideas. Generally, they don't want to invest in research either. Now, there is an exception, but if you go to someone and say, I want money, you know, to do a proof of concept experiment, that's you're probably barking up the wrong tree. Do you agree?
Yeah. And you have to think about it from a competition point of view. You know, some medical products can take 10, 15 years to get going. In a SaaS product, I can know if it's going to work in a weekend, right? Like I can just pick up a few phone and I'll know.
Yeah.
So,
Wei Jing, do you have a question?
Yeah, I have a question. I got a massive grant, just phase one. Should I wait to get the phase two to raise funding or no?
No, you want to do, you do have to time them both appropriately and make sure the ask matches where you're at with the company. So like, I don't know what you're asking for, but if you were going to be like, we need $10 million and we only just raised 250K through our phase one, I think that's what it is, right? 250.
Yeah.
So then you're like, that might not make sense, and it might, depending on what you're doing. But if you're like, to add more value to that, we want to do a match, and matching is a big thing too. That happens sometimes, meaning you go and raise 250K and you're going to match that raise with the phase one. That's a good way of doing it too.
And how much money should you raise?
As much as needed to hit the next milestone. We talked about these inflection points. So if whatever the next thing that you need to do to either go and get your FDA moved along the pathway or to go and get sales, like it should be enough money to accomplish that task. And typically it's between 12 and 18 months of funding to do that.
So you don't buy into the notion of always ask for more than you need?
No.
Why?
I mean, because if you don't know how to spend the money, then you don't know what you're trying to accomplish. And I think that can get, if people are going to give you more money, take it. But if you, like, for example, if you're like, I need $1 million, and you're like, what for? And you're like, I need $1 million. You got to know what you need it for.
Right. Yeah, which brings up this issue of, you know, there's the inevitable hockey stick slide in the pitch, which is all smoke and mirrors usually, and everybody just kind of rolls their eyes. So what's your advice in terms of that slide? Well, I mean, you know, everybody knows it's a game. And if you to your point, if you don't know what you think you're going to need to spend in the next 6 months, pretty close to, I wouldn't say the penny, but you have to have a pretty good idea of what's going to cost. Then that's what you should ask for. Do you agree with that?
Yeah, 100%. So like, for example, if you need to hire 2 people, assume 150K per person raise, even if you're paying them $60,000 or $70,000. So you need 300 grand. Like, it's pretty simple if you actually like just keep it very specific to the people that you need. So you already know you need to hire 2 people. Something's going to come from that. So you need 300 grand. To go to the hockey stick graph, the finance slide is the most importantly irrelevant slide on the deck, because if you throw out some crazy numbers, all I do is just discredit you and your capability. So like if you go, I'm going to go from, we're making no money, and in year 1, we're going to do $5 million in sales. No way. I don't care what you're selling. That's not happening. Right. But if you go like year 1, we're going to do like $500,000 to 5 million to 10 million, I start to believe you. Sometimes what will end up happening is people will do that hockey stick and they're like, we're doing 500,000, 1 million, and then we're going to hit 40 million. And then you're going to be like, what, why the jump? You're going to get this question. And so you can really screw yourself if you put these numbers in incorrectly. The other thing that happens is the market slide. If your numbers don't align, so let's say, for example, the market is a $50 billion market, but the people you're going after is 50 million, let's say. And in year 5, you say that you're going to be a $40 million business. Like you really don't have a grasp on your market size or how to sell, because you just told me that you're going to get 90% of your market in 5 years, and that's definitely not going to happen. And so those slides don't really matter, but if you mess them up, they make it's a huge deal.
Right. I throw out this thing about the 3 W's: want it, worth it, win it.
Mm-hmm.
In other words, have you demonstrated that customers actually want what you're proposing? Number 2, is it wanted? Worth it? Is the size of the market big enough and the potential return justify the risk? And win it is how are you going to beat everybody else? So this gets to it, there's this old saw that angels and investors bet on the jockey and not on the horse. Is that in fact true?
Totally. So I think this goes back to that valuation question we had. Want it? Are people are buying it? So that's your traction. Is it worth it? Is the market big enough for your valuation, for your ask? So if you're coming in with a $50 million valuation and I want 100x return, well, you can run the math on that, and I can just see quickly that the market's either big enough or not big enough. And then the win it, what was the win it concept?
Do you have the people to pull it up?
Oh yeah.
What's your strategy and how you're going to beat everybody else?
Yeah, and this is a big one in the medical space typically because most of us aren't salespeople. I'm not a sales guy. I like to build things. Yeah, are you capable, or did you hire the right people to do that? Another one that happens a lot actually in this win it concept is just because you won it at Merit Medical or BARD or some big organization does not translate that you can do it on your own. And so if you've never been through the ringer of trying it yourself, you got to be very cautious about those things.
Yeah. Chris, do you want to ask a question?
When you look at angels, I don't know if this applies as much as VCs, but there's always this risk versus greed dichotomy, right? Those are 2 important factors for VCs. So, you need to look at the horizon. And Tim, maybe you could talk about what angels actually investing in. Are they investing in the product or the service, or are they investing in the founders and the management team? Because that's hugely important, right?
Yeah. I think it can be a hybrid of both, and I think it depends on every deal that's coming through the door. And a true angel who's just doing this as a hobby wants 100x return. They want that story that they were the first into Uber and it sold for $1 bajillion. Like that's the story that they want to tell their friends, right? The second part of that is they don't want to look stupid in front of their friends. So like, why did you invest in Uber? It didn't work, right? Like they don't want that story. So there is, go back to your question again. I think I took myself off of it, but
is it more important? Is the product or the person more important?
Oh yeah.
And you're saying both.
Both. Yeah. So again, so if I want to align myself with the person, so sometimes there's just people that you just believe they have this thing. It doesn't matter what they do.
Like Elizabeth Holmes.
Yeah, that people just believed her. And I think I don't have that skill. That's not my thing. So I'm on the
neither did she, obviously.
Yeah, well, yeah, but people believed in her and what she was, the story that she was telling.
Right.
And so I think that's why typical salespeople gravitate to CEO roles, because they can just sell that story.
Yeah.
But other people sell the technology, and I would sell the technology, and then you would be more investing on the technology and the team. But like, I don't have that charisma to sell my team first.
Right. So what about the brutal truth that women, minorities, people with a lisp, I mean, you name it, the list goes on and on and on of people that are having a hard time raising money, other than white males. So what do you say to the people on this call who are not white males?
Okay, so I am going to disprove that statement. So at Park City Angels, I think about 40% of our deals are female founders. So I really don't like this topic because I want to hear all of your stories, and I really don't care about who you are, where you came from. I don't care. We go business first, and founder second. I will say, and I will address the LISP concept. I have to understand what you're saying. It doesn't mean I don't like you. But if I can't understand, then you're just losing me in the process. And I do think that is a huge barrier to entry. The second part of this goes to, we would love more communities. Like, so I try and work very closely with the Black Chamber in Utah, but they don't really let us in either. So we need this to work together better. And so like, I just want to know more about these groups. And so what I would say is what's beautiful today is there are groups that are focused more on women founders and marginalized groups. Like I think it's called Beta Boom as an accelerator. Like there's lots of great opportunities which will give you above the noise, right? If I apply and someone else applies, I'm not the trigger, which is fine, totally cool. Because people have to be much more intentional about filtering deals. Like I said, I get 1,000 of them. And so, but for me and Park City Angels, I got to be honest, I don't care. I don't care.
Okay. So if you're on a startup or a founder team, and the founder or the person that is the CEO is not the best person to pitch for a number of reasons. It's not because they're not smart, maybe they're not smart. I don't know. There's a million different reasons. Because as you said, the medium is the message. And this is about telling a story and basically selling interest in whatever it is you're trying to sell. It's a sales pitch.
Yep.
And some people are good at it and some people are not. And communication is 85% nonverbal.
Right.
So when you put all that together, what advice do you have to founders groups as far as who should do the pitch?
Yeah, so the person who can sell the best. And I think that's being cautious. If you have the relationship, you should pitch. It doesn't matter if go back to this at LISP, who you are, it doesn't matter. If you have the relationship, my company, and I have a sales guy who can present, but I have the relationship with Arlen, I should be pitching to Arlen. If it's a group of people who we don't really know that well, the person who has the charisma and can present in a way that the investors, like go back into my 4 questions, understand what you're talking about, can prove that it can sell and do all those things, that person should present. But the CEO or the founder or the whatever should also be there because they can answer the questions, usually better than a person who should present. And in this case, and you should not flip-flop. You shouldn't go back. And I don't think you should have multiple presenters. It's just confusing. So I really think the person who can present and sell, and then the whole point of the pitch is to get to due diligence. So if someone's better at that, let them be good at it. There's no ego there. You're getting money. Like, and I think as founders, sometimes we sit back and say like, oh man, I have to do it. Like, for example, I'm working with a company right now. I can pitch anyone's company, but the founder's the story and he's a much better sales guy. Like, why would I take that from him? Even though I could still pitch it good,
And most people, well, not most, a lot of people in biomedicine and science or clinical care are not trained to do this. They're not salespeople. We all know that. They get into what they do for different reasons. So you wind up doing this, and now you got to sell, but you don't know how to sell. And so what are some tips on how to become a better pitchman or pitch woman?
Okay, so self-plug, read my book a lot of times. It's called the Pitch Deck book.
It's actually a very good book. I like it because it's no bullshit. It's here's what you need to do. Here's some examples. It's not paragraph after paragraph. It's, because most of us are sort of doers. Like, tell me what to do so I know what to do. So I would recommend it to you, and it's pretty cheap. So I think it's a good value.
And it's like a 2-hour read max. if
Yeah,
you
it's
read
a
the whole
it's a
thing.
quick
It's
and
really
dirty
fast.
read. Right. Right. Okay. So read the book. What else?
Yeah, so read the book. So the second thing is its format really does matter. And like kind of like I talked about before is, you get to you really just need to organize it into a story. And that's the book tells you the story flow. If you don't know what you're doing, it's problem, solution, how do you make money? What have you done so far? What's next? How big's the market? So and this is what you should do, okay? If you can't communicate the problem and the solution really simply, and meaning if a 6-year-old can't tell you what you're doing and who's you're solving the problem for, it's too complicated. So if you have a kid or know a kid, be like, hey buddy, what do I do? And if they can't repeat it, you don't know what you're doing. Not you don't know what you're doing. You can't communicate it in a way that an investor will hear it. So that's one way.
There's also lately we're seeing micro pitches, 1-minute pitches, 2-minute videos, 3-minute this and that, all the way up to a 20-minute sort of presentation before a vetting committee of an angel network.
Yep.
What's the point of all of that? I mean, why are people asked? I mean, obviously you get a lot of deals, and I guess it's like dating. In the first 10 seconds you can tell whether there's going to be a fit or not.
Mm-hmm.
So why waste 20 minutes when you're going to know in 1 minute in a pitch? Is that the idea, or what's the point of all that?
Yep, that's the idea. So you have 2 points. From a investor point of view, I just don't have time, but I want to see more deals. So a 1-minute presentation is really, really good. 3-minute is good, and then you get to the 20. But then from the entrepreneur side, you can actually leverage that by removing a ton of details and making it really exciting. So, you can take that 1 minute, just give me enough information that I want to learn more about you. Don't spill the beans. Don't give me everything. You don't have enough time to do that anyway. And a lot of people are like, blah, 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 and they'll talk really, really fast. But the best thing that you can do, truthfully, is remove as much information as you can, forcing them to have to ask a question. And so once you have the question, then you follow, it becomes a sales tactic. And I used to do this. I've raised like $400 million or something for people. So we would use tactics so that we would know, we could lead to which questions people would ask, and we would leave that information out intentionally.
So I frequently task students and people that I work with to do this 1-minute pitch exercise. And basically you have to make a video. So another thing to improve your skill is to practice, practice, practice. And that means having somebody take a video of you with a cell phone. I mean, this is not complicated. And do a 1-minute pitch without a script, like you said. And so that's number one. And then you can see yourself and you kind of go over and over and over until you get better, because you're probably going to have to pitch your idea a lot. You're going to have to kiss a lot of frogs to find the right prince. I mean, it's like a full-time job, really, raising money. And depending on where you're going, you could be in airplanes and flying all over the place, or maybe remotely, which is another question. Are you getting back to face-to-face pitches, or has the game changed permanently?
We do a hybrid. So all of our screening meetings are online. Our in-person meetings are 50-50. So we have a general meeting, 50% online and then 50% in person. Because what we find is angel groups typically are networking groups first. People just want to meet people. But I did hear of a group in Denver or Boulder, it's BI something, that's got like 200, 300 virtual members. So
you're not talking about Rocky's Venture Club.
No, some other one. I just heard about it
in
yesterday.
Boulder. Yeah.
Yeah.
Or Innisphere, one of those places. Okay.
So yeah, so it's a hybrid. For me, I prefer in person.
So when you do a 1-minute pitch, or any pitch, there's basically 3 parts to it: the hook, the body, and the close. So the hook is the story. When was the last time you found yourself in a hospital and the 18th person handed you a clipboard? Didn't that drive you crazy? So that's kind of the hook. Like, oh, gee, now I got my intro. Yeah, that happens to me all the time. I hate that. So it's like this ethos, pathos, logos kind of thing and rhetoric. You want to kind of communicate and find some common ground with the audience in 5th grade English, as you previously mentioned. Number 2 is, so that's essentially the problem. The body is a brief explanation of your solution. We've eliminated clipboards, and you show a picture or a prototype. It's always good to have a prop. Like, here's what we're going to do. Like, and you hand it to somebody, like, go to this iPhone app, and you don't have to, it gets rid of all the clipboards. And then there's the close, which is essentially a call to action. If you're interested in learning more about how to change the future of medicine, call me in a minute. Now you can, and actually you divide the time of the minute. So we're talking 60 seconds. So roughly 30 minutes will be the hook. 30 seconds will be the hook. 15 seconds will be the body, if not more. And 1 sentence is the close. So that's about a second, 2 seconds. And you can practice that and just put it all together, and you make a video of it. And if you want, you can put it on your website. You can use it for marketing collateral. You can do a lot of stuff with it. But that's what I would suggest you do, and try it. Because if you don't practice, it's really hard to do this. And a lot of people are scared to death to get up in front of somebody and talk. You've heard about that. So if you can't do it, find someone on your team who can, or hire them, or, get somebody on your team who's good at marketing, sales, communication, digital marketing, that kind of stuff. Lawrence, you're on the call. Hello. So you weren't here when we talked about inflection points. Lawrence is an intellectual property strategist. How important is nailing down the IP portfolio and creating barriers to entry as an inflection point when you're looking for money?
When you're looking for money, I always recommend thinking about the 5 mantras of the investor in order of importance. Number 1 is intellectual property. So you really have to state that you actually have intellectual property to guarantee to the investor that you own this innovation, your innovation. That is my always number 1 priority. Unless you can actually prove that you own this, then the investor will think from the get-go, why am I going to invest in this? He hasn't actually ascertained that he owns this innovation. It's not protected. If he's not protected, I'm not protected.
Good.
I would call that the number 1 inflection point. Number 2, management. Number 3, audience, who's going to monetize it for you. Number 4 is product being down the list. If you have stellar management, because people invest in people and the product isn't stellar, they will make it stellar, not the other way around. And number 5, the barriers to entry. Imagine them in a circle, starting with 1, bring it round to 5. 1 and 5 are next to each other. And therefore, intellectual property is a critical barrier to entry.
Okay, so we have about 5 minutes left, and I want to just ask a further question and then open it up to anybody else. So you pitch to the angel, they say, great, we like your idea, here's a check, and then what? So what can you expect? So you're going to come up with a term sheet, and we don't have time to go into term sheets. Maybe that's another subject, but you figure it all out. But I'm thinking in terms of subsequent rounds and what happens to the initial money. Because again, people say that the latest money is usually the most expensive. So is that true? And can you just kind of lay out the landscape of the fundraising plan from inception to $100 million annual recurrent revenue?
Yeah, totally. That's a big question. So let's go back a little bit. So let's say you're raising $1 million, or you own all the company. You and a couple people, own all the company. You go and you raise $1 million valued at, let's say $10 million. So these guys now own about 10% of your company, depending on some things. So you and your team now own 90% of the company. And let's say it sells for, you know, let's say we raised $1 million, 10 million, like $100 million. You split that 90-10. So you made a good amount of money, but the next round of funding, it starts diluting. And I don't want to get into cap tables. It gets really complicated really, really quick. And there's a great tool, Carta. If you're not familiar, go check it out. They have a free version for entrepreneurs. But you can kind of play around with this as if you raise the next round of money, what actually happens to the founders and everybody else. Everyone starts getting diluted. It's really, really complicated. But the thing that keep in mind is if you're raising capital, you're tending to try and multi-X the value of this company. And so therefore your percentage, even though it's lower, is still worth more money also. So I think that's something to keep in mind. But it does get really complicated really quick. So if you're not managing your cap table from the very beginning, and this happens a lot in all businesses, like 3 of us on this call, like we're equal partners. We're not, don't do that. But make sure that you have structures in place to get rid of people on a cap table, because I've seen a ton of deals, especially recently, where if the cap table's messed up, no one will do the deal.
And what advice would you give to people that want to work for startups? They're not owners, they're advisors, consultants, chief medical officers, whatever. And when in the negotiation, the question comes up, how are you going to pay me? Equity, cash, both? What's your advice to the founder?
To the founder. So make sure you have what's called a cliff. Okay, so a cliff means that, let's say, for example, they're going to earn up to a certain percent of equity. Let's say it's 5%. A cliff means they have to work for the company for at least a year typically and accomplish certain tasks. If there is no deliverable on their end and they're just hanging out for a year, you literally just wasted equity. You make sure that these people do something for you. Medical devices and things like that take a really, really long time. And then after that, after they hit that cliff or deliverable, then and let's say, for example, they earned only 1% of their 5% over that first year. They hit all their milestones. Then you do like a slow roll. So they earn a certain percent of the rest of that 4% over the next 3 years. And again, they can either accelerate that by hitting certain milestones. They can decelerate that by not hitting certain milestones. So you want to make sure that you don't just give people 5%, they earn that equity. So that's one way of doing it. Certain roles have certain parts of equity. If they're just an advisor, it's typically between 0.5% and maybe up to like 1.5%, 2%, depends. But again, all of that's earned. No one's just given it right away. It's delayed.
And should you offer stock or options or both, or what as a founder?
If you can pay people, pay people. If you can't, then, equity is the way to go.
Right. Okay, great. Well, unfortunately, we're out of time. If you can put your email, if you would, in the chat, where people can get in touch with you in case they have any further questions. And this has been great. I hope we've been able to answer some of the more common questions that come up with this. And we appreciate your interest, and we'll see you next month with another version of this. So thanks a lot.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, take care.